Ryan Cooper has a really interesting piece over at theweek.com. You'll recall back, I think it was Tuesday of this week, I was talking about how middle-aged, middle-class white men are committing suicide and dying from alcoholism and drug addiction at a rate that is causing the death rate for the entire cohort of white men from roughly 35 to 60, or 35 to 54, as I recall, was the age range, is causing their death rate to go up in ways that we haven't seen since the collapse in any demographic like that since the collapse of the Soviet Union. For a couple of years there after the collapse of the Soviet Union, similarly, you saw men dying like this for this reason. And it was, because of economic uncertainty. But Ryan, and the thing that I had missed in my analysis of this, I talked about racism. I talked about how, my dad had that white middle class dream, of when he came back from World War II, getting a job in a tool and die shop and getting a home in a suburb with the GI Bill and all these things that most African Americans were blocked from in the 50s. And my point was, we need to be sure, if we're going to put this economy back together, if we're going to change our trade policies, if we're going to bring our factories home, if we're going to put our cities back to work, that we do so in a way that's colorblind, that or to the extent it can be, that is all inclusive. Because by and large, the middle class boom in the 50s, I mean, we were a legally segregated society at that time. That boom was largely confined to white men about the age who are committing suicide now. And they're committing suicide because that future that they thought they had, that they grew up with, looking back on their parents, they don't have it. But Ryan Cooper says poor white Americans are dying of despair and racism is to blame. And, I thought this was fascinating. He says, well, basically that, poverty he says, American poverty is increasingly brutal. Male wages in the bottom fifth of the income ladder, for instance, have fallen by over 30% since the late 60s, and inequality has exploded. These days, those in the top 1% capture virtually all economic growth. I mean, if you've ever listened to Bernie Sanders, you know that to be the case. But then it gets really interesting. He says, now, the reason that, okay, you've got that, and you've got all these white, quote, middle-class men, middle-aged middle-class men who, in a previous generation, right now at this point in their lives, would have been making, in today's dollars, $30,000, $40,000 a year. In some cases, much more than that, $50,000, $60,000 a year. In some cases, and even $70,000 in some of the more specialized factory jobs. And now they're laid off. They don't have a job, and the social safety net in America is not strong enough to catch them. Right? Unemployment has been limited to a year in most places. The Republicans 2 years ago refused to extend long-term federal unemployment. It still has, it's still blocked. Welfare is only available for a maximum of 5 years. We are 6 or 7 years into a Great Recession. And he points out that the reason why during the Clinton administration they cut back on welfare, during the Reagan administration they cut back on housing and education assistance, during just basically through this whole thing, is that and why universities have become more expensive. They've done away with free education, their disability insurance, unemployment insurance, all dialed back. No child allowance, no paid vacation, stuff like that. The reason all that stuff has gone away is because historically, the white people who are the majority of the voters voted against it because they believed, this is going back to Reagan's welfare queen thing, they believed that these welfare benefits were going to black people. And the white people were saying, we don't want to be paying taxes to be supporting a bunch of black freeloaders. And now the white people are in the position of needing those resources, and they're not there, which is something African Americans could have told you for a long, long time. Not to mention that the jobs aren't there, which, has been the case for African Americans for a long, long time. So I wanted to update my rant. I thought that was Just a fascinating insight and a really worthwhile one.